Have you ever emptied your pockets at the end of the month and counted coins, actual coins, just to see if you had enough for tomorrow? Maybe nobody knows you do this. Maybe you've never told anyone, because there's a specific kind of shame that comes from working a full month and arriving at the last week with nothing but loose change and a growing silence where your confidence used to be. This is the story of a man who sat on his kitchen floor one night, counting coins by lamplight, and finally understood why, no matter how hard he worked, the money always disappeared before the month did. Stay with me until the end, because what he discovered that night might be the same thing you've been missing too. James was 34 years old. He drove a delivery truck for a wholesale food company 6 days a week, early mornings, long routes, physical work that left him tired in his bones by Thursday. He earned enough. Not luxuriously, but enough. Enough for a man with a wife, a 7-year-old daughter named Lily, and a 1-bedroom apartment they had outgrown 2 years ago but couldn't afford to leave. On the surface, James looked like a man holding it together. His truck was clean, his uniform was pressed, he never missed a shift. But underneath, James was financially invisible. He had no savings, no emergency fund, no plan. He wasn't reckless. He didn't gamble. He didn't drink his money away. He simply spent everything that came in and couldn't explain where any of it went. His wife, Clara, had stopped asking about savings, not because she didn't care, because the conversation always ended the same way: James going quiet, then frustrated, then promising next month would be different. Next month never was. The most painful part? James had told Lily, his 7-year-old daughter, that money doesn't grow on trees. He had sat her down and explained the importance of saving. He had told her, with a straight face, that you must always spend less than you earn. He believed every word. He just couldn't do any of it himself. And that made him feel like a fraud in his own home. The thing James never told anyone, not Clara, not his brother, not a single person, was that he was afraid to check his bank balance. Not occasionally, constantly. He would tap his card at the petrol station and hold his breath. He would pay for groceries and feel his chest tighten while the machine processed. He had learned to look away from the receipt, because knowing the real number felt worse than not knowing. If he didn't look, he could still pretend things were okay. And pretending was the only financial strategy James had ever really mastered. On a Thursday evening in February, Lily came home from school quieter than usual. James noticed but said nothing until after dinner, when he found her sitting on her bed, holding a folded piece of paper. "What's that?" he asked. She handed it to him without a word. It was a school trip notice, a 3-day educational visit to a nature reserve. Cost $80, payment due in 2 weeks. James read it twice, then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. "Can I go, Daddy?" Lily asked. "Of course," he said. "Of course you can go." He smiled. She smiled back and climbed into bed, satisfied. James turned off her light, walked to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and put his face in his hands. $80. He got paid in 4 days. He had $23 in his account and 11 days until his next paycheck after that. He couldn't tell Clara, he couldn't tell Lily, he couldn't tell anyone that he, a grown man who worked 6 days a week, could not find $80 for his daughter's school trip without it breaking something in their already stretched life. He reached into his pocket. Then the other pocket. Then the kitchen drawer, the counter, the little dish by the door where loose change collected. He spread everything on the table under the kitchen lamp and started counting. Coins, just coins, $4.60. He sat there in the quiet of his kitchen while his family slept, and something inside him cracked wide open. Now here's what most people in James's position do next. They borrow the money, they feel relieved. Lily goes on the trip. And then the next month arrives and the cycle starts again. But James didn't borrow, because that night, instead of closing the kitchen drawer and going to bed, he did something he had been avoiding for 3 years. He opened his banking app, and he actually looked. What James found wasn't what he expected. He expected chaos. Instead, he found a pattern. And the pattern was worse than chaos because it was invisible and completely consistent. Every single month, without fail, James spent $40 on subscription services he barely used, $60 on food delivery on the nights he was too tired to cook, $30 on impulse purchases he couldn't account for, $80 on petrol for weekend drives that had become habit rather than enjoyment. Small amounts. Every one of them felt harmless in the moment. But James did something he had never done before. He added them up, not just for this month, for the entire year, $210 every single month, for 12 months. That was $2,520 gone, not spent on emergencies, not spent on family experiences or meaningful things, spent on the quiet, invisible, forgettable purchases that left no memory and no value behind. $2,520, enough to move to a bigger apartment, enough for 6 months of emergency savings, more than enough to send Lily on 31 school trips. James stared at the number until his eyes burned. He hadn't lost that money to bad luck. He hadn't lost it to one big mistake. He had lost it $20 at a time, in moments that felt like nothing, across a year that felt like it had passed in a blur. The money had always been there. He just hadn't been watching his bank account. Here is what nobody ever teaches us about money. The reason most hardworking people stay broke is not because they earn too little. It's because they have never once sat down and watched where their money actually goes. Not guessed, not assumed, watched. There is a difference between earning money and managing money. James had been earning for 12 years. He had never once managed. Managing means knowing, before the month begins, exactly where every dollar is going. It means every dollar has a name before it arrives: living, saving, emergency, growth, not whatever is left at the end. Because as James discovered, there is never anything left at the end. You have to decide at the beginning. The coins on his kitchen table weren't a sign that James had failed. They were the first honest conversation he had ever had with his own money. And that conversation, painful as it was the beginning of everything changing. That night, James didn't go to bed. He stayed at the kitchen table and wrote out every expense in his notebook, every single one. No judgment, just observation. Then he cancelled 2 subscriptions. He deleted the food delivery app. He created 4 simple categories in the notes on his phone: living, saving, emergency, growth. And he divided his next paycheck before it arrived. He found the $80 for Lily's trip without borrowing from anyone. 3 months later, he had his first emergency fund, enough to cover 1 month of expenses. Not because he earned more, because for the first time in 12 years, he stopped looking away. So here is my question for you today. When did you last look, really look, at where your money goes each month? Not a glance at your balance, a full, honest look at every category, every subscription, every habit, every quiet leak in your cracked cup. Because the money you're looking for might already be there, you just haven't been watching it. Drop a comment below and tell me, which of these sounds like you right now? A, I know where my money goes. B, I have a rough idea but not really. C, I honestly have no idea. I read every single comment. And if this story felt familiar, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Streams of Wealth. Every week we tell another story like this one. Real people, real money, real freedom. I'll see you in the next one.